Shalom all, we continue our Genesis to Revelations annual studies. Today we are on a topic of Deuteronomy 28, which has caused big divisions between certain groups. It is titled Blessings and Curses. Now before I start on today's study, I will address 2 points of a certain Hebrew Israelite group's case of how to identify who are the real Hebrew Israelites. In other words, this is 2 of their points, which is in addition to the slavery one about ships, the ships argument, which is their main one. 2 others are customs found in some African or other cultures that match those of the Bible and DNA similarities. In other words, they say because some countries have certain customs that are mentioned in the Bible, they must be the original Hebrew Israelites. Or that DNA comparisons make them original Hebrew Israelites. But on the DNA comparisons, to whom are they making the comparison? They actually made a comparison to the people who they claim are not their real Jews. Because they cannot make a comparison with anyone else, because no one else is classed as anything to do with Jews. And they can't stand on their own and say, well, we've got such and such DNA, so we are the real Hebrew Israelites. So they compare it to the people who they're actually claiming are not the real Hebrew Israelites. Anyway, I have dealt with the slavery aspect in other writings, i.e., they say because they were slaves in the 16th or so century, traveling to Africa and so forth, and England, and they were carried on ships, that this connects them to Deuteronomy 28. But in short, my point in that is that there has been slaves transported in ships for centuries before and after Messiah's death, as that was the means of transportation before aeroplanes. If we look at when Solomon got all the goods from wherever he got them from to build his temple, we see it all came by ships. He had tradesmen, I think 10,000 per time, travelling on ships to and fro for work. So people have always been, slaves and workers have always been travelling by ships. And it hasn't just been between people of the Bible and so on. It's been all around the world, even if those cultures not mentioned in the Bible. So in short, I said as I said before, Christ's death. Okay, so we should not connect the slave transportation events of the 16th century to Deuteronomy because of that point. So on the similar customs case, I saw an episode. So this is just an example of how we can't use things that seem factual. I saw an episode of a program called Paternity Court, where the father of a now 30-plus-year-old woman was to be verified as her father, or so that was the case. These are the facts that came out. This father, or this man should I say, had been sleeping with his wife's relative, a female relative, for 2 years without protection. Everyone told the child, that she looked like the children of the man and his wife, none of whom the child had ever met. Her mother told her government financial maintenance department that he was the father when the child was born. It is now 35 years later, and when the DNA was done, so now they're going to basically see, is this man who he believes is her father for 35 years, is the father because of all these facts that we've done, or not? And they think the DNA would prove that he thought DNA would prove that he is the father. But when the DNA was actually done, the results, i.e. the actual fact, was he was not the woman's father, the child's father. So the conclusion to which everyone had jumped did not fit all the facts. And that's the point I think we're making when we use things about because people have certain customs in other countries. Now, I will not tell you of another fact as to why he was not the father, but the lesson for us is we must not form conclusions based on some of the facts when there are 2,000 to 4,000 years of unknown facts, how these people in different countries got the same customs of others in other countries. We know, for example, the eunuch in Acts chapters 8, people used to travel to Jerusalem for the festivals and the feasts annually, and they would take back the gospel or the messages and so forth. So that could be how they got customs 4,000 years ago. So, just because our parents or parents of those countries say, oh, we got them because we connected to the Bible, does not make it so. And remember the people in the book of Esther, at the end of them, they became Jews. To become a Jew in that time, you take on the customs of the Jews. Some got circumcised and so on. So my point is, customs of people today does not connect them necessarily to people of the Bible. On the second point that they try to use, the one, or second addition to the slavery one, of DNA similarity case. As I said, who do they compare the DNA to? But people are making a thing about DNA verification. When Abraham became a believer after being taught by Noah, and we know he's taught by Noah if we read the book of Josephus, his God account. That's how Abraham became the believer in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and believed the God of Noah. Now, when he wasn't a believer, and when he changed to be a believer through his education through Noah, did his DNA change from that of when he was born and followed his father's pagan gods? Or when he was tested by God to sacrifice his son Isaac, and he passed the test, did his DNA change then? Ishmael should have DNA of Abraham, who was his father, yet he is not a Hebrew nor an Israelite. Same with Esau and Jacob, who had the same father and mother. I say that because people say, oh, but Ishmael had a different mother than Sarah. But when we come to Esau and Jacob, they had both father and mother, same parents, but yet Esau is not a Hebrew Israelite. But we will assume that he had the same DNA as his father Abraham, has his brother Jacob, and has his mother. So if DNA is a means of identification, how come Joseph's, for example, two sons would have the same DNA as all the other 12 tribes, if that's what you're going to come by Hebrew? Because his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, came from an Egyptian daughter of a pagan priest or an Egyptian priest. So his Manasseh and Ephraim didn't have the same Hebrew parents. Yes, that was only in Jacob. So, but yet, when you compare all the 12 tribes and you assume they have the same DNA, Manasseh and Ephraim would have the same DNA as Judah and all the others who came from different parents. Also, Jacob's 12 sons came from 4 different women. Yes, so if we say, oh, well, providing they have their father, then that's what counts. Then you have to use that same argument with Ishmael, because Ishmael had the same father as Isaac with Abraham. So when you put all these things in the pot, I think the DNA verification is rubbish and an unreliable theory on which to base who is the real Hebrew Israelites today. Okay, so let's get on to our study of Deuteronomy 28, where we put all these other things aside.
Lessons for Obedience, Deuteronomy 28, reading from verse 1. God speaking indirectly through Moses. And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of Yahweh thy God, to observe and do all his commandments which I command thee this day, that, or then, Yahweh thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come on thee and overtake thee, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of Yahweh thy God. Blessed shalt thou be in the city, and blessed shalt thou be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of thy body, and the fruit of thy ground, and the fruit of the cattle, the increase of thy kine, and the flocks of thy sheep. Now the list of blessings continues to verse 15. but all are conditional on obedience. Not by paying a big tithe to a pastor. They cannot be bought with money, as Simon thought in Acts chapters 8:18 with Peter. So it's amazing the number of Christians who claim to be blessed by God, maybe because they have money, yet are not keeping all the commands of God, as he claimed, as he stated, and believe that some of these commandments are nailed to the cross. They cannot be kept for some reason they claim, or that some other denomination teaches that they cannot be kept. We do not judge if we are blessed by the financial money we have, because the devil can also give riches, and crime can be prosperous, and we know crime is sin. Deuteronomy 28, reading from verse 9. Yahweh shall establish thee an holy people unto himself, as he hath sworn unto thee, if thou shalt keep the commandments of Yahweh thy God, and walk in his ways. And all the people of the earth shall see that thou art called by the name of Yahweh, and they shall be afraid of thee. So only one nation or group of people were called holy and belonged to God out of all the people of the earth. And their distinguishing factor was keeping God's commandments. So can anyone or Christians today who are from the other people of the earth, i.e. Gentiles not keeping the commandments, claim, teach, and practice that they do not have to keep these commandments because of grace, etc.? Is that not foolish after reading the importance God puts on keeping them? And also some of the other verses that we are yet to read to show us how important these are in God's eyes. Continuing from verse 13. And Yahweh shall make thee the head and not the tail, and thou shalt be above, only, and thou shalt not be beneath, if that thou hearken unto the commandments of Yahweh thy God, which I command thee this day to observe and do them. Verse 14. And thou shalt not go aside from any of the words which I command thee this day, to the right hand nor to the left. So not doing all these commandments is to serve other gods, because what they teach over what God teaches is choosing their teachings over God's. Similar to a person who tells 99% truth but 1% lie, they are still a liar. Continuing from verse 15, curses for disobedience. But it shall come to pass, if, the condition again, thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of Yahweh thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that then all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field. Verse 19. Cursed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shalt thou be when thou goest out. Yahweh shall send upon thee cursing, vexation, and rebuke in all that thou settest thy hand unto for to do, until thou be destroyed, and until they perish quickly, or until thou perish quickly. Breaking off a little bit, I got a WhatsApp message yesterday of how some children in Nigeria burnt their mother because the pastor told them they're not being prosperous because their mother is a witch. When God tells us in His commandments, if they'd read them and understood them, how to be prosperous. So, returning to my comments, does this sound like a God that will later reward, bless, or save from a second death for not keeping these commandments? Would He send His only begotten Son to save people in their sins, or to call them to repentance to be saved? Repentance being stop disobeying and start doing, as it says, all His commandments. For what reason does it seem logical that He sent His Son to let them continue breaking His commandments, or to teach them to stop breaking His commandments and be saved? Continuing from verse 27. Yahweh will smite thee with the botch of Egypt, and with the emerods, and with the scabs, and with the itch, whereof thou canst not be healed. Yahweh shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart. And thou shalt grope at noonday as the blind gropeth in darkness, and thou shalt not prosper in thy ways. So my comment again, prevention is better than cure. God says if we obey, he does not give us illness. That does not mean we may not get ill from our habit of, for example, going out in the rain, or from what we consume, or what we consumed years ago before we started to obey, or even the devil, like Job, we may have chosen to do. However, healing comes with obedience, prayer and fasting, not payment of money. Matthew 17 verse 21, and also James 5:16, that reads, confess your faults one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. Effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. So in that verse, James speaks of confessing your faults to each other, not your sin, i.e. your mistreatment between brethren. And then he says the righteous man's prayer gets results, not necessarily the unrepentant person's prayer. Continuing from verse 36. Yahweh shall bring thee and thy king which thou shalt set over thee unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, and there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone, and thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all the nations where Yahweh shall lead thee. Now remember this verse, as we shall see this is what happened in the later books of the Bible, when Israel and later Judah disobeyed, keeping all these commandments. Continuing from verse 45. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenedst not, or did not listen to the voice of Yahweh thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever, because thou servest not Yahweh thy God with joyness and with gladness of heart, for the abundance of all things. Verse 53. And thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and of thy daughters, which Yahweh thy God hath given thee, in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee. So that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eyes shall be evil towards his brother, and towards his wife of his bosom, and towards the remnant of his children which he shall leave, so that he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children whom he shall eat, because he have nothing left in the siege, in other words to eat, and in the straitness wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in all thy gates. Verse 56. The tender and delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness, her eye shall be evil towards thy husband of her bosom, and towards her son, and towards her daughter, and towards her young one that cometh out from between her feet, and towards her children which she bare, for she shall eat them for want of all things, secretly in the siege and straitness, wherewith thy enemies shall distress thee in thy gates. If thou wilt not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that thou mayest fear this gracious and fearful name of Yahweh thy God. So that is how bad things will get for them. They'll have nothing to eat and want to save their lives. The warning and deterrent of eating your own formerly beloved children and spouse should show how important obeying these commandments are to God, that he is not a God that would punish former people like we just read to that extent for not keeping them, and then in the New Testament take the requirements to keep them away. It is nonsense. Continuing from verse 60. Moreover, he will bring upon thee all the disease of Egypt which thou wast afraid of, and they shall cleave unto thee. Also every sickness wickedness and every plague which is not written in the book of this law, them will Yahweh bring upon thee until thou be destroyed. Verse 64. And Yahweh shall scatter thee among all people from one end of the earth even on to the other, and there shalt thou serve other gods which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even the wood and stone. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. But Yahweh shall give thee there a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear day and night, and shalt have none assurance of thy life. In the morning thou shalt say, Oh, I wish it were evening. And at evening thou shalt say, Oh, I wish it was morning. For the fear of thine heart wherewith thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see. Verse 68. And Yahweh shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondsmen and bondswomen, and no man shall buy you. So the word again in 28:68 means they were in Egypt and will be taken back again in ships. As we read through the Bible, we shall see if they were subsequently scattered. The mode of transportation in those and subsequent time was by ships. Some examples of this is in 1 Kings chapters 5 verse 9, when Solomon was building the temple. It reads, My servant shall bring them down from Lebanon unto the sea, and I will convey them by sea in floats unto the place that thou shalt appoint me. Verse 13, And King Solomon raised a levy out of all Egypt, and the levy was 30,000 men. And he sent them to Lebanon 10,000 a month by course. A month they were in Lebanon, and 2 months at home, and Adoniram was over the levy. So here we see at least 10,000 men went by ships in addition to the stock of trees and things that Solomon was getting to build the temple. So we should see that again happen in Bible times. Recently, some Ethiopians were relocated to Israel. It was by plane, not ships. Today's transportation of people is by air. So if there was to be a return to Egypt in the future, I suspect it would be by planes and not by ships.
And as we notice above in this verse 68, it says, No man shall buy you. But as we know, the slavery trade of the 16th plus centuries, slaves were bought and sold. So it doesn't quite fit the Bible precept or the Bible instructions. Okay, let's go continuing.
Deuteronomy 28 is used today by a group of colour to claim ancestry of being the original Hebrews who came out of Egypt with Moses. If via that claim they are saying believers should return to keeping the above commandments, then I am for that, regardless of colour. The New Testament confirms that there was a scattering prior to the New Testament. We read this in the following examples of the book of Acts, where Jews came from every nation under heaven. And Peter and James wrote to those scattered tribes. We also read that neither faith nor grace in Christ cancels out the keeping of these laws, in the verses below referring to God forbid. So in a sense, the keeping of these laws does not save us, but we do need to keep them, as God himself says, to be saved. Acts chapter 2, reading from verses 5 to 8, but I'm just going to read verse 5. And it says, And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. So they had come to keep the day of Pentecost from every nation under heaven, where the ancestors were formerly scattered. Go on to James chapters 1 verse 1. James, a servant of God and of the Messiah, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greetings. Peter, in verse 1 also refers to the former scatterings. Peter, an apostle of Yeshua, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, and so on. So that's to show you there was a form of scattering in biblical times, which meets Deuteronomy 28. Now going on to whether the obligation to keep these laws have been changed. Some examples to show that grace, faith, or anything else hasn't taken that way. Romans chapter 3, verse 31. Do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid. Yea, we established the law. God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Romans 6:15. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law but under grace? God forbid. Romans 11:1. I say then, have God cast away his people? God forbid, for I also am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. Last one, Galatians 2:17. But if, while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves also are found sinners, is therefore Christ the minister of sin? God forbid. So clearly, faith in Christ, belief or grace does not detract us from keeping the commandments of God. Now, some of these people I talked about, using colour to cause a division, use the present economic, social and other such circumstances of their people, for example in America, and link the same to curses of Deuteronomy 28. Part of their claim requires the linking of the black slave trade of about 400 years ago to the curses of Deuteronomy 28. Now, I will not go through the individual verses used and how they link some of the same, but every nation who has been in slavery at some point in history can make similar connections. Indeed, many have, and of various colours or non-colour. Each group of people are familiar with their history, but not that of others' slavery, for example. For economy of my time and not to depart too much from the purpose of the daily studies of studying what is of the Bible rather than what is not, I'll make a few points in regards to these people who use Deuteronomy 28 as their basis. Regardless of who descended from which son of Noah, the true original Hebrews, they all ended up in Egypt via Jacob and Joseph. The 70 Hebrew souls or persons that went into Egypt because of the famine with Joseph also went in as a whole household with numerous other people, the servants and so on, or captives. There were intermarriages with other nations such as Judah as one large household, just like Abraham took his 318 servant men and went to free Lot and circumcised them. Everyone's treated as a household of Abraham, and everyone's treated as a household of Jacob and the 12 brothers or sons. And in each household, the servants outnumbered the owners, let's say the Hebrews. Second point, 430 years later, each group of the household multiplied so that on coming out of Egypt, there will again be more non-Hebrews than Hebrews in the congregation or the nation of Israel. In other words, if there's 70 Hebrews and they have 300 servants, and each multiplied, 300 becomes 600, 70 big one becomes 140. After 430 years in Egypt, you'll have more servants or their descendants than of the natural people, Hebrews. And all of these people came out making up the nation of Israel. Third point, almost all the men were killed because they didn't have faith when God told them to go to Promised Land or conquer a nation. You may remember when they brought back an evil report, and it's only Caleb and Joshua and some others who God spared. So that the composition, birthline of who was left, i.e. the children who grew up to be the adult men in the promise and went to the Promised Land, we do not know. Because during those 40 years in the wilderness, we don't know who married who had offsprings, and so on. Remember, they took in a lot of women and young children when they captured some other people. So again, again, we cannot say that these people are all one colour, even basing it on the men who came out, because all those men died. So in short, we have no conclusive biblical information on which to base any colour argument. As we continue to read and study, we should see the tracing of colour becomes even more frustrated with further intermarriages, wars, captives and exiles. For example, Solomon had 1,000 wives and concubines from pagan women. We have read God had one law for the homeborn or stranger, not whether they're Hebrew or non-Hebrew, Jew or Gentile. So to me, the nation and congregation of Israel is a common faith in the God of Abraham, or Isaac and Jacob, not a colour or a race. If preaching and advocating colour helps to bring disobedient people to obedience to the laws in order to get the blessings and overturn the curses, fine. If it is for some other ulterior motive of causing division, war between races, or taking people back to the faith of some ancestral fathers of the Egyptology, then I oppose it. One last side note. Christianity is said to be the white man's religion because they use a white, blue-eyed man's image as Jesus to promote it. Persons of every colour or non-colour are happy to use things of other people or colours when it suits them, but not when it does not. We all share types of food, Indian, Mexican, Caribbean, Chinese, hot dogs, hamburgers, without making derogatory claims. We share designs in clothing, makes of cars, types of houses, economic and financial discoveries, etc., yet again do not make the derogatory divisions. So the claim against the use of the image is for sinister motives, not of God. Ephesians 6 verse 12, for we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, and spiritual wickedness in high places. They use whatever they can to achieve. They don't use whatever they can, the divisions, to cause division. Now, the use of image, that is said the Caucasians use to promote Christianity, they use an image they knew to teach the message of the God of Abraham to themselves. Later that same image and teachings was extended to others. It was not designed for others. Lastly and briefly, as my time is scarce, Christianity may be a pollution of the Church of Rome of the early modern centuries of the teachings of God through his scriptures that existed before their polluted translations. But it was fundamentally not of their religion, but a faith in the God we logically and historically can prove, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. So in other words, it wasn't a Christian God like what it was today. It was originally the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, which we all who follow the Bible accept. You can read a study titled Who Are the Real Jews? Or Heirs of the Promised Citizens of the Kingdom on www.4toyahweh.com, which goes into more detail on this Deuteronomy 28 and so on. But I think the lesson to note from studying Deuteronomy 28 is the importance of keeping God's laws, and it is illogical that he would cancel any of them. Shabbat, Shalom, until next time, God willing.